My wife asked for some Easter eggs, so looks like I'm making eggs. Our template is, let's say, about 5¼ by 7½, or 5½ by 7½ roughly, kind of squared. We're going to try to cut multiple blanks to make this guy out of some 1x10s I picked up. Now, you can't see it very clearly here, but I've got 3 of these 6-foot 1x10s, and I'm trying to decide exactly how I want to do this to break these down to the right size pieces. I think the easiest thing to do is going to be cut them in roughly half and then rip them down to the appropriate size, and then come back with the miter saw and chop them down to the appropriate width. Now, onto the table saw. So as I said, I'm going to rip these boards down to give me a width of about 7½ inches. So I'm going to set my table saw up to do that and go ahead and rip the boards. So to make these repeat cuts easier, I've set up a stop block about 5½ inches from the blade here on the miter saw. Gonna make a test cut first to see if it works, but hopefully it will. And the tape measure tells me it is maybe a little over 5½, but that is totally fine for this. So now I've got a box of almost eggs right here. I'll pick this up tomorrow with the router table, and we'll see what they look like. So I might be able to tell from my beard that we've moved a few days ahead in time here, and I was hoping to work on the eggs kind of in bits and pieces here and there. But unfortunately, my wife and I were laid low this week by a stomach bug, so I'm going to have to try and get all these done in one kind of long work session here this evening. So the plan is to set the router table up, route all these shapes out, cut them down, round them over, sand them, smooth them, paint them again, and keep our fingers crossed that they look, okay. So the plan is to make about 24 of these eggs from these wood blanks that I made the other day. Probably going to make a little bit more than 24 so I don't have to worry if anything goes wrong at some point. But to get started, I'm going to go through the blanks here and see if I can pick the ones that are going to be the sort of easiest to route. I want to avoid things like this. A knot kind of in the center doesn't bother me, but one here where we're going to hit the router, I'm going to try to avoid that.
One eternity later.
So, big 26, not all perfect, but I think we can make them work. So as you can see with this one, I got a little bit ahead of myself and started routing this before I realized, oh yeah, I'm going to need to cut these off some. So we'll go ahead and do that here. I could gang these up with some of the double-sided tape I'm using here, and I may do that, but for the moment at least, I'm just going to stick with kind of routing this basic template and see how this works for now. So, we've gotten a little bit close to the edges. Now I think it's time to give the router table another shot. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. So overall, gives us a pretty good result. Matches the outline of the egg pretty well. But you can see we've got some little stuck up pieces here, some overburden or something like that, if you will. But it'll be pretty easy to come back with some sandpaper or the palm sander, kind of knock that down at the end. Also planning to kind of round this over, so we might just do that at that point as well. But all in all, pretty happy with how that turned out. So now I just need to do it 23 more times. And so there we have it. 25 Easter eggs that look way more like gravestones than I thought they would. That's mostly because they're painted with this chalkboard paint, and the idea is that people can write or draw things on them with a piece of chalk that they're also going to get when they get them. So doing this, I learned a couple things. One of the keys being to try to not get sick while working on a project like this and have to complete it in like less than 12 hours. Also, I really suck at painting things. It is not a skill I have or have really ever acquired. As I mentioned in the video, I thought it'd be easier to sort of gang these up with double-sided tape when I ran them through the bandsaw, but that turned out to not work as well as I'd hoped it had. I had a lot more control over a single piece at a time than 2 or 3 stacked up. That being said, it would have been great if I could have ran multiple of these through the router table at a time. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the results. I think I would have done some things differently had I more time, gone through maybe and rounded over the edges with a router bit, maybe sanded them a bit more, taken more time with the paint to give multiple coats, a lot more time to dry, maybe sand it a little bit. But given this is just kind of a giveaway from the store, it'll work for now. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you've ever made any kind of weird trinkety things that your wife is going to give out or use, and Had to wait till the last minute to finish it. Thanks.